Before we start, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It was late, just past midnight, and the dim light from the street lamps outside cast long shadows across our bedroom wall. I reached out under the covers, my hands searching for the comfort I'd known for over 20 years. But tonight, Emma flinched. "I'm tired," she said sharply, not even turning to look at me. I blinked, confused. Her tone was clipped, cold, like I was a stranger touching her in the dark. "Emma, that's never stopped you before," I said softly, trying to keep my voice low, soothing. "Is something wrong?" She whipped the blanket off herself and sat up, her back rigid. "I'm tired of being questioned, Jack. God, why do you always need a reason for everything?" Her words echoed in the room like glass shattering. I sat up slowly, breath caught halfway in my throat. My heart raced, not from anger, but from that strange, slow panic that creeps in when something familiar suddenly becomes foreign. "I didn't mean to question you," I said carefully. This feels different. You feel different." Emma snorted bitterly. "You want to talk about different? How about being married to a man who thinks he's entitled to affection just because he did the dishes and paid the bills?" I stared at her, stunned. "Is that how you see me? You think you're some kind of hero for folding laundry and picking up Evan from the train station?" she snapped, glaring down at me like I'd just insulted her mother. "You want to meddle, Jack?" "No," I said quietly. "I just want to know what happened to us." Her lips curled into something cruel. "Nothing happened. You're still the same boring man who reads history books in bed and eats the same cereal every morning like it's sacred." That hit harder than I wanted it to. Not because of the words, but the venom behind them. I swallowed. "Emma, I don't recognize you right now." "Well, maybe that's your problem, Jack," she fired back, voice rising. "You only see what you want." We sat there in silence for a moment. The only sound was the dull hum of the old radiator in the corner. I laid back against the pillow, staring at the ceiling, trying to find the right words, but everything inside me felt suspended, like I was watching my life slowly bend in a direction I couldn't stop. Emma turned her back to me again, pulling the covers tight around her. I didn't try to reach for her this time. And in that stillness, something in me cracked. Not loudly, not violently. Quietly, like the first hairline fracture in old glass. Because I knew this wasn't just exhaustion. Something had shifted. Something real. It was the kind of evening I used to look forward to. My birthday had always been a modest affair. Nothing showy, just a few friends from the university, a casserole or two, and Evan by my side, smiling like he used to when he was little and thought I was the strongest man alive. The dining room smelled of roasted garlic and lemon. My colleague Frank brought over his famous chicken again, and the candles flickered gently against the soft clinks of cutlery and conversation. The table was full. My department head was retelling the story of his disastrous honeymoon in Arizona, and even the neighbor from upstairs had come down with a bottle of wine and a bad joke about aging professors. I laughed when I was supposed to. I nodded. I poured wine. I passed the bread. But there was a space beside me that stayed cold. And every so often, someone would glance at the empty chair and then glance away again, pretending they hadn't noticed. I finally excused myself from the table and stepped into the hallway. The phone rang twice before she picked up. "Emma?" I asked. Her voice came through flat. "I'm at Claire's." I paused. "You knew today was—" "I didn't forget. I just didn't want to be there. I figured you'd enjoy playing host without me." There was a tightness in my chest I didn't want her to hear. "You could have said something earlier." "I'm saying it now," she said plainly. "Happy birthday, Jack." Then the line went dead. I stood there a moment, holding the phone like it might bring her voice back. But it didn't. Only the sound of forks tapping plates and muted laughter drifted from the dining room. When I stepped back in, the room quieted slightly. I could feel them reading me, testing the shape of my face for cracks. I smiled. Not big, not performative. Just enough. She had something else planned, I said, easing back into my chair like the seat hadn't turned to stone. Conversations resumed, but softer now, like the air had thinned. Across the table, Evan's eyes found mine. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He just nodded once, like he understood more than an 18-year-old should. Later, as we washed dishes in the kitchen, he leaned against the counter, arms folded. "You okay?" he asked. I kept my gaze on the sink. "Sure. You know your mother. When she decides something, that's it." He nodded again, slower this time. "Yeah, I know." I glanced at him then, tall now, broad-shouldered like me, but with his mother's sharpness in the eyes. He was watching me carefully, like he'd memorized every shift in my face since he was a kid and could read the truth under anything I said. "Thanks for being here tonight," I said. He shrugged. "Of course." I dried my hands and turned to him. "You know, there's a kind of peace that comes when you stop expecting someone to show up." Evan didn't flinch. He just took a deep breath, reached into his coat pocket, and handed me a small box wrapped in blue paper. "Open it later," he said, "when the house is quiet." Then he gave me a half hug, more shoulder than arms, but I held on to it longer than I should have. He didn't pull away. By the time he left, the candles had burned low and the hallway light buzzed faintly overhead. I stood in the doorway for a long while after, listening to the sound of nothing. The kind of quiet that fills a house after everyone's gone home. The kind of quiet that doesn't leave. It was nearly midnight when I heard the sound of keys fumbling at the front door. The house was still, save for the distant hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the hallway clock. I hadn't gone to bed. Couldn't. I sat in the armchair by the window, half shrouded in the dark, sipping lukewarm tea that had long since gone bitter. Then came the click of the lock, the slow swing of the door, and in stepped Emma. Black coat wrapped around her like a shield, scarf loose at her neck, her heels clicking softly on the hardwood floor. She moved like nothing was unusual, like she was walking in from a grocery run and not from skipping my birthday dinner entirely. She paused when she saw me standing in the doorway, arms folded. Her eyes flicked over me briefly, then past me, like she was calculating whether she could make it upstairs without talking. "You're still up?" she said, setting her purse down on the entryway table. "I figured you'd come home eventually," I replied calmly. Emma glanced down at her boots, nudging them off with one foot. "You didn't need to wait up." "I didn't wait," I said. "I stayed awake. There's a difference." She exhaled softly, half sigh, half impatience, and walked past me into the kitchen, flicking on the light. "You want tea?" she asked, already reaching for the kettle. I followed her in slowly. "Where were you?" "I told you. Claire's." "That's not what I meant." She turned the faucet on, filled the kettle, and didn't look at me. "We talked, had a glass of wine, watched a movie. And you didn't think." I paused, swallowing the lump that had been sitting in my throat since dinner. "You didn't think your husband might want to see you on his birthday?" She finally turned to face me, the faintest frown between her brows. "Jack, it's just a date. One day, you had your friends over. You seemed fine." I let out a quiet breath. "Just a date." "Yes," she said simply. I stared at her for a long moment, and then I said it, slowly, evenly, without raising my voice. "Do you remember your 29th birthday?" Emma blinked. "What does that have to do with—" "There was a blizzard," I continued, "and I walked 6 miles to get to your apartment because your car had broken down and your phone died. You were crying because you thought I wasn't coming." She opened her mouth, but I held up a hand. "I brought you a slice of peach pie because you said once it reminded you of your grandmother. And I stayed with you all night while the power was out, keeping candles lit and reading you pages from that awful mystery novel you liked." Her face shifted, just a flicker, but I saw it. The memory was still there, however buried. "That was a long time ago," she muttered, pouring water into 2 mugs like the moment hadn't just landed between us like a boulder. "But it happened," I said, voice low, steady. "That's the difference, Emma. You used to show up. You used to care." She stirred the tea absently, not offering one to me. "I still care." "Do you?" I asked, watching her. "Because tonight, it didn't feel like it." She turned around slowly, arms crossed, her voice flat. "I'm tired of being guilt-tripped every time I don't meet your expectations." I nodded once. "Right. Because wanting my wife at my birthday dinner is an unreasonable demand." She stared at me, eyes narrowing. "This again. Jack, not everything is about you. Maybe I needed a break. Maybe I needed to be somewhere I could breathe. And yet here you are," I said quietly. "Back here, in this house, after vanishing all evening." Emma threw up her hands. "What do you want me to say? That I'm sorry? That I should have sat there next to you pretending everything's fine when it's not?" "No," I replied. "I want you to be honest. For once." Silence bloomed between us, heavy, raw. "Finally," she said, "I didn't want to be here tonight. That's the truth. I didn't want to fake smiles or listen to Evan ask me where I've been lately. I didn't want to feel trapped." I nodded slowly. "Thank you. At least now I know where we stand." Emma looked at me for a beat longer, then turned away and picked up her mug. She walked out of the kitchen without another word, footsteps fading down the hall. I stayed there, still as stone, my hand resting on the counter where the second mug sat untouched. In that moment, I understood something that had only been a whisper before. Whatever we used to be, it wasn't coming back. Not as long as she kept treating my presence like an obligation. And yet, I wasn't angry. Not really. Just hollow. Like the silence itself had finally taken shape and decided to stay. It was early. Still gray out. The kind of morning where everything feels a little slower, a little heavier. I hadn't slept much, just drifted in and out of restless thought until the sun finally forced its way through the blinds. By 8, I was already halfway across town, driving through the quiet streets of Oak Ridge, one of those older suburbs where everyone still raked their own leaves and the mailboxes were shaped like little barns. Emma's sister, Claire, lived in a modest 2-story house with a pale blue porch and wind chimes that tinkled gently as I walked up the steps. I rang the bell once and stood there, hands tucked into my coat pockets. Claire opened the door in a soft robe, her hair pulled up, coffee in hand. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw me. "Jack," she said, surprised. "Everything okay? I just wanted to ask something. Won't take long." She stepped aside, letting me in. The smell of toast lingered in the air, and a small dog barked once from the living room, then settled. We sat in her kitchen, same one I'd sat in countless times over the years, usually while Emma and Claire laughed over something neither of them ever bothered to explain to me. Claire tilted her head. "Is this about last night?" I nodded. She said she was here. She was, Claire confirmed. Showed up around 7, had some wine. We watched that cooking show she likes. She left a little before midnight. I let out a quiet breath and nodded. Claire studied me for a moment. "She didn't mention it was your birthday. I only found out when I saw Evan's post online. She didn't say a word." My throat tightened a bit, but I kept my voice even. "I didn't come here to cause a scene. I just wanted to be sure." "She's not herself lately," Claire murmured, setting her mug down. "She's distant, angry, cold. It's like she's trying to burn down something and doesn't even care what gets caught in the flames." "She doesn't talk to you about it?" I asked. "She shuts down the second I ask," Claire said. "Last night, I could tell something was off." She laughed, but it didn't touch her eyes. She kept checking her phone, and when she left, she didn't hug me. Just said, "Thanks," and walked out. I looked down at the wooden grain of the table, running my thumb along a scratch near the edge. "I'm filing," I said quietly. Claire didn't respond right away. She just looked at me for a long moment, her expression softening. Then she reached across the table and placed her hand gently over mine. "You deserve peace, Jack." That simple sentence settled in the room like dust. It didn't fix anything, but it didn't have to. It was enough to be seen. Claire walked me to the door. The wind chimes sang again as I stepped back onto the porch. "I'll always be here for Evan," she added gently. "And for you. You're still family to me." I nodded, unable to speak for a second. I managed a faint smile, then walked down the steps and back toward my car. The morning sun had finally broken through the clouds, casting long shadows across the pavement. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel uncertain. I just felt done. It was quiet in the study. Still, almost reverent. The morning light came and slanted through the blinds, casting narrow stripes across the cluttered surface of my old oak desk, the one I'd had since grad school. I'd written lectures here, graded hundreds of essays, pinned notes to Emma in our early years when life still felt like a shared page. Now, it held only one thing, a manila folder marked "Petition for Dissolution of Marriage." I took a long breath before sitting down. No shaking hands. No storm inside me. Just a slow, heavy sort of calm. The kind of calm that only follows long resistance. The kind of calm you feel right before closing a door. I reached for my pen and began to sign. Line by line. Initial by initial. It wasn't rage that moved my hand. It was clarity. There wasn't much to fight over. The house was legally hers. She'd inherited it from her father, and we'd always agreed it'd stay in her name. I'd never cared about the title, just the life inside it. But that life wasn't there anymore. By the time I reached the last page, my signature flowed without pause. When I finished, I pulled my wedding ring from my finger, worn smooth over 20 years, and laid it on top of the papers. The small clink it made against the folder was louder than I expected. I sat back, letting the silence stretch. No one stormed in. No voices called me back. Just the soft creak of the house settling around me. By noon, I had packed a small overnight bag. Not out of drama, just necessity. A few shirts, a pair of shoes, a leather-bound notebook. The rest could wait. I drove across town to Evan's place, a modest studio near the campus. He'd moved out last year when he got his scholarship, insisted on paying partial rent to learn responsibility, though I still covered most of it without him knowing. He opened the door in sweats and bare feet, hair tousled like he'd just woken from a nap. "Hey, Dad," he said, rubbing his eyes. "What's up? Got a minute?" I asked, stepping in. We sat at the small kitchenette table. He poured us both coffee without asking, like he knew I needed it. I slid the folder across to him. He didn't touch it, just looked up at me. "I filed this morning," I said. He nodded once, slowly. "You okay?" I took a sip of the bitter coffee. "I'm steady. I think that's the word. Steady." Evan leaned back in his chair, processing. I kept waiting for her to come back. I continued. Not physically, emotionally. I gave her space, patience, grace. But at some point, I realized I was waiting for someone who wasn't walking back through the door. He didn't speak for a moment. Then he asked, "Do you want me to call her?" "No," I said quickly. "This isn't about guilt or anger. I don't want you to get in the middle." He nodded again, eyes flicking toward the ring box I had placed beside the folder. There was a long pause, and then he stood and came around the table. Without a word, he wrapped his arms around me. He hadn't hugged me like that since he was a kid, back when he used to run to me after soccer games, muddy and grinning. Now his grip was firm, grown, steady, just like I'd hoped he'd become. "I get it," he said softly beside my ear. "Go live your life." I closed my eyes for a second and let the weight of those words land. He pulled back, gave a small, wry smile. "But next time you move out, don't bring instant coffee. That stuff's a crime." I laughed despite myself. It was the first real laugh I'd let out in days. "I'll keep that in mind," I said. And just like that, the hard part was over. Not the grief, not the history, but the decision. The cab rattled gently over the highway as the skyline slipped past in the distance. Familiar, gray, and receding. I sat in the back seat, coat folded neatly beside me, a duffel at my feet, the airport 20 minutes ahead. The driver had the radio low, some soft jazz murmuring beneath the traffic. I hadn't said much since getting in, just gave the terminal and settled into the silence. Then my phone buzzed. "Emma." I hesitated for half a second, then picked up. "You really just left?" Her voice came in sharp, hot, laced with disbelief. "You didn't even tell me to my face?" "I didn't think it would have made a difference," I said evenly. Her breath caught. "You're not even going to try to work this out? Just vanish?" "I didn't vanish, Emma. I waited. Quietly. For months." There was a pause, then she scoffed. "You're twisting this. You're trying to make me the villain." "No," I said, my tone calm, not cold. "You made that choice all on your own." "Jack, this is insane," she snapped. "You don't just walk away from 20 years. You don't just pack a bag and disappear. What are you doing? Running?" The cab turned sharply onto the expressway ramp. I kept my eyes on the window as the city buildings drew smaller, the skyline giving way to open sky. "I'm not running," I said softly. "I'm choosing peace." A long silence. Only the faint static on the line and the driver's fingers drumming lightly on the steering wheel. Then Emma's voice returned, lower now, edged with something between confusion and panic. "Why now? Why like this?" I looked down at the creased knuckles of my hand. "Because staying in a house where I'm resented, where every kindness is seen as manipulation, that's not a marriage. It's a sentence." "You think you're perfect?" she spat. "You think I was the only one who changed?" "No," I said, but I never stopped caring. The silence that followed wasn't angry. It was hollow. "Jack," she said finally, her voice cracking slightly, "you're just going to walk away from everything we built?" "We didn't build it together anymore," I replied. "I built. You watched. And then one day, you stopped even doing that." She didn't answer. Just a long, stiff breath, then the harsh click of the call ending. I set the phone down beside me, letting it rest screen down. Outside, the buildings had disappeared now, replaced by wide sky, airport signs, and runways in the distance. The driver looked at me through the mirror. "Flight on time." "Yeah," I said, almost to myself. The cab rolled on, and I stared out at the vast, open stretch of sky ahead. Chicago was behind me now, and I didn't look back. Before we go on, tap subscribe to catch the next drops. 3 years. That's how long it's been since I watched the Chicago skyline vanish behind the fogged window of that taxi. Now, my mornings begin with the hiss of a coffee machine and the smell of sea salt carried in from an open balcony door. Melbourne has a rhythm all its own, slower in some ways, sharper in others. And somehow, I found myself falling into step with it like I'd always belonged. I live in a modest flat near the bay. Nothing fancy, white walls, open windows, and a work desk covered in tubes of acrylic paint and sketchbooks filled with trial and error. The sea is 2 blocks away, and every morning at 6, I jog the length of the coast, headphones in, the soft roar of the tide in my ears. I teach 2 literature courses at a local university. Older students, mostly. A few younger ones sprinkled in. It's quieter than the tenure track back home, but I like it that way. The students are curious, blunt in that Australian way, and strangely respectful. No one here knows what happened to me before. I'm just Jack to them. Just the guy who drinks too much tea and knows too much about Hemingway. And I've made friends. Real ones. People who've never met Emma, who've never seen the house we used to share, who never witnessed the way I used to carry silence like a second coat. There's Claire. Not Emma's sister, a different Claire, mid-40s, blunt bangs, a biochemist who paints on weekends and swears too much over board games. She calls me Professor America. I call her Melbourne Lightning because of the way she storms through rooms. We go to trivia nights sometimes. No romance. Just laughter and understanding. Then there's Yusuf, my neighbor downstairs. Former military, now a baker. Brings me fresh sourdough every Thursday like it's a holy ritual. I think he knows I needed the routine more than the bread. I swim now. That surprised me too. 3 times a week. I head to the community pool before dawn and glide through the water like I'm rinsing off the old life I left behind. Something about being submerged, the silence, the weightlessness. It reminds me that moving forward doesn't always have to feel like effort. Sometimes it can feel like floating. But the past doesn't vanish. It softens, sure, fades around the edges, but it doesn't disappear. Sometimes I catch myself tracing a faint scar on my finger where my wedding band used to be. Or I'll hear someone mention Chicago, and I'll freeze for half a second before pretending it's just another city I once visited. It's not pain anymore. Just history. A country I left, but still remember how to navigate if I close my eyes. Some evenings, I sit on the balcony, brush in hand, painting the curve of waves, the tilt of rooftops, the way the clouds shift color just before dusk. It's not art, not really, but it's mine. And for the first time in a long time, that's enough. The late afternoon light poured golden over the coast as I set out 2 mugs on the balcony table. A breeze carried the scent of eucalyptus and salt, and somewhere down the block, someone was strumming a guitar with more heart than talent. Melbourne had a way of wrapping around you like a warm coat that didn't ask for anything in return. Then came the knock. I opened the door and found Evan standing there, duffel bag in one hand, smile just crooked enough to look like mine. 3 years had filled him out. A stronger jaw, a more settled look in his eyes. But the warmth was still there. Still my boy? You didn't have to fly all this way, I said, pulling him into a tight hug. Couldn't break news like this over FaceTime, he said, chuckling. Besides, you make better coffee than my fiancé. Fiancé? I blinked, stepping back. He grinned and held up his left hand. Not a ring, but a small tattoo on the inside of his wrist. Her initials, entwined in a clever design. Got engaged last month. In New York. I led him out to the balcony. The sun was just low enough to bathe everything in amber. We sat, the coffee steaming between us. What's her name? I asked. Isabel. Izzy. You'd like her. She's smart. Challenges me. Tells me when I'm full of it. She sounds perfect. Evan sipped from his mug, then looked out toward the ocean. Weddings in November. We're keeping it small. Brooklyn loft, string lights, close friends. I nodded slowly, trying to absorb it all. You're really grown, aren't you? He laughed. I had a good model. Even when everything fell apart, you stayed steady. I didn't respond. Just smiled faintly and took a sip of my coffee. After a while, Evan leaned forward, voice lower now. I wanted to tell you something else. About Mom. My fingers curled loosely around the mug. Go on. She's different, he said carefully. Not better or worse, just changed. She brings you up more than she used to. Talks about the way you used to make pancakes on Saturdays. How you drove through a snowstorm just to meet her for that concert in '98. I said nothing. The memory was still intact. The cold, the broken windshield wipers, the way she laughed when I showed up soaked but smiling. She regrets it, Dad. I can tell, he added. I kept my eyes on the water. And what do you want me to do with that? He hesitated. Nothing. I just thought you should know. I nodded once, still watching the horizon. The waves moved like breathing. Constant. Indifferent. Do you ever talk to her? I asked. Occasionally, he said. She asks about you, but I never say too much. I think she's hoping you'll reach out one day. I won't, I said calmly. Not because I hate her. I don't. But I worked hard to be here. To be this version of myself. I'm not willing to trade peace for nostalgia. Evan didn't push. He just nodded and let the silence settle. After a few minutes, I stood and walked back inside. He followed, and I grabbed a second mug for tea. Now tell me, I said, changing the subject. Is this Izzy of yours ready to meet a father-in-law who once lost a foot race to a pelican? He laughed hard at that. If she isn't, she'll learn fast. The moment shifted, light again. Easy. But somewhere in the back of my mind, her name still echoed. Emma. Once my whole life. Now just a shadow in my son's stories. The venue was tucked away in Brooklyn, with floor-to-ceiling windows that let in the late autumn light like a warm invitation. String lights glowed above, casting soft halos over exposed brick and white linen tables. It was the kind of wedding Evan had always dreamed of, simple, thoughtful, real. I stood beside him at the head table, watching as he laughed with Izzy's cousins, beamed during the toasts, and danced like no one was recording. He looked steady, joyful, every bit the man I'd hoped he'd become. And when Izzy walked in, graceful, radiant, his eyes said everything. They were in love. That kind of love I used to know. When it came time for my toast, I stood, glass in hand, heart full but steady. I cleared my throat and let the room settle. I don't want to make this too long. My son has always rolled his eyes when I start quoting books in casual conversation. So I'll just say this. Watching Evan become the man he is today has been the honor of my life. And watching him find someone who loves him not in pieces, but in full, well, that's all any father could hope for. A quiet murmur of emotion swept through the crowd. Izzy's eyes welled, and Evan reached over to squeeze my arm, just once. I sat down, heart calm, knowing I had said only what mattered. The music swelled again, laughter returned, glasses clinked, and people floated across the floor like soft shadows under string lights. That's when I saw her, Emma, standing by the far end of the hall near the tall windows, wrapped in a deep blue dress that was too elegant to look effortless. Her hair was pinned up the way she used to do it when she wanted control. But her expression, that was new, raw, fragile. Her eyes locked on me and didn't let go. I turned back to Evan and Izzy, smiling as they greeted a friend from college. I felt a tap on my arm a moment later. Jack, she said. I turned. She was closer now, close enough to see that her hands trembled slightly, that her mascara had smudged just under her left eye. Can we talk? She asked. I looked at her for a moment before nodding and stepping slightly away from the noise. We stopped near a table of flickering candles and half-eaten cake slices. She tried to smile, but her lips quivered. You look, well, really well. I am, I said simply. Emma looked down, then back up, eyes already shining. I've thought about this moment. What I'd say, what I'd ask. I waited. I've changed, she said, voice soft and breaking. I see things now I didn't before. I see you. And I miss. She stopped herself, eyes searching mine. I didn't look away. My voice came low, calm. Last time we spoke, you told me my birthday meant nothing to you. Her face crumpled. I didn't mean it, she whispered. But you said it, I replied, steady. And you meant it enough not to come home that night. Tears welled and spilled over, silent and uncontrolled. I was lost, she said. I thought pushing you away made me strong. I nodded slowly. And maybe it did. For you. Her hand reached out halfway, then faltered. You're really not coming back, are you? She asked, almost inaudibly. I already left, I said. What you're asking is if I'd undo that. Emma stepped back like she'd been slapped, then turned, shoulders folding in, and walked quickly toward the exit. She didn't run. She fled. Eyes turned. Whispers stirred. But no one followed her. I stood there a moment longer, then turned back toward the dance floor, where Evan was spinning Izzy around under the lights, both of them laughing like the world couldn't touch them. And maybe, for a moment, it couldn't. It was a late Sunday afternoon, Melbourne sky overcast and pressed low against the city. I'd just finished cleaning my brushes, letting a new canvas dry near the window, smudges of ocean blue and charcoal gray that still hadn't decided what they were going to become. Then came the knock. Soft, uncertain. I wiped my hands on a cloth and walked to the door, not expecting anyone. And there she was, Emma, hair windswept from travel, face thinner than I remembered, suitcase in one hand, a tremble barely masked behind her breath. I didn't speak. Neither did she, not at first. Then, slowly, as if afraid the words might collapse in her mouth, she said, I didn't know where else to go. I studied her for a long moment, saying nothing. She shifted her weight awkwardly, eyes darting past me into the apartment like she was trying to imagine who might be behind me. No one's here, I said. She nodded once, then looked down at the handle of her suitcase. I'm tired, she said quietly. Not jet-lag tired. Just tired of being alone. Tired of pretending like I didn't ruin something good. Her eyes lifted to mine. I see it now. What I had. What I threw away. You. You were the best thing in my life, Jack. I let those words sit for a moment. Then I stepped back, just far enough for her to come inside if she wanted. She didn't move right away. I'm not here to beg, she said, voice cracking. I know I don't deserve anything from you. But I'm not offering anything, I interrupted softly. If you stay, it's not as my wife. Or even someone I owe anything to. She nodded again, eyes glassy. You can stay, I said. But you'll have to rebuild everything from scratch. No promises. The suitcase handle creaked under her grip. I understand. And with that, she stepped inside. The door clicked shut behind her. Neither of us said another word as I took her coat and hung it near the door she once walked away from. The apartment was quiet. The silence wasn't warm. Not yet. But it wasn't cold either. Just waiting. Melbourne moved on as it always did. Waves crashing, markets bustling, seasons shifting in their quiet southern rhythm. And so did we. Emma stayed. Not like before, not as the woman who once filled a home with her sharp laugh and sudden storms, but as someone smaller now. Not in presence, but in weight. She didn't try to reclaim space she'd lost. She didn't ask where we stood. She simply stayed. She started waking up early. Not to join me on jogs, at least not yet, but to make tea, open windows, and stand barefoot on the balcony while the wind moved through her hair. Sometimes I'd catch her watching the city stretch itself awake, as if trying to learn its pace. She found a local therapist, went twice a week without needing to explain it. Some nights, she'd come back quiet but clearer. I never asked what was said in those sessions. She never offered, and that was fine. We shared meals, often in silence. She cleaned dishes without being asked, folded my laundry without announcing it, bought a second easel and started painting, badly, at first, but with honest effort. She never touched the old photos, never brought up Chicago, never said, I love you. Not once. But once, I walked in and saw her carefully rewrapping the linen on my most used paintbrush, the one with the split bristles. Her fingers moved gently, like she knew not to rush the repair. That told me more than words. As for me, I didn't change course. I still taught, still jogged, still painted skies I couldn't quite describe. I didn't offer her more than civility. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I saw her. I saw her trying. Not perfectly, not desperately, but steadily. One night, weeks after she'd arrived, I was setting 2 mugs of tea down on the table. She looked up and asked softly, Do you want me to leave? I paused, met her gaze. No, I said. Not yet. She nodded, and we drank in silence. The peace between us wasn't built on forgiveness. It was built on quiet. On small, honest effort. On space. She didn't try to fix me. I didn't try to need her. And maybe that's why it worked. Not as love. Not as marriage. But as something else. Something slow. Patient. Something new. And that was the end of my story. I still wonder about the night Emma showed up at my door, suitcase in hand. Alone. Humbled. Asking for nothing but a place to begin again. She didn't beg. She didn't explain. She just stayed. So tell me honestly, did she do the right thing by coming back, or was it far too late? Let me know in the comments. And if this story moved you even a little, Don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more.